Mom expects me to give away my vacation home that I bought after years of saving to my sister, who carelessly got pregnant in college, dropped out and is marrying her deadbeat BF, so that they can get a Kickstart, when the only Kickstart ever got was being kicked out of the house at 16 for having a BF years ago. I never thought I'd be the one to call my family toxic, but some scars from the past never quite heal. I was 16 when my mom threw me out of the house. It wasn't for drugs or stealing or anything like that. No, it was for having a boyfriend. I still remember the night she found out. She was furious, shouting about how I was a disgrace and how I'd bring shame to the family. I tried to reason with her, to tell her it wasn't anything serious, but she wouldn't hear it. She packed a bag for me, shoved it into my hands and told me to figure out life on my own since I clearly thought I was an adult. I didn't have a lot of options then. I crashed on a friend's couch for a few weeks while going to school and started working at a diner. It wasn't glamorous and it definitely wasn't easy, but it kept me afloat. I worked double shifts, saved every penny I could and eventually got my degree. It took years of struggle and sacrifice, but I clawed my way out of that hole. By the time I turned 28, I had a stable job in finance and enough savings to buy myself something I'd always dreamed of, a small vacation home by the lake. That house was more than just a property to me. It was a symbol of everything I'd endured and overcome. It wasn't huge or fancy, but it was mine. I spent weekends there, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, feeling like I'd finally achieved some semblance of peace. My younger sister Lisa was the golden child. She was the one my mom doted on, the one who could do no wrong. When she got pregnant during her sophomore year of college, Mom's reaction couldn't have been more different from when I simply had a boyfriend. Instead of outrage, there was endless sympathy. Poor Lisa had made a mistake, but she was just a kid. Mom welcomed her home with open arms and dropped everything to help her. Lisa's boyfriend, Danny, was no prize. He didn't work, had no ambitions and was content to live off Lisa and Mom. But Mom loved to gush about how they were going to make it work and how their baby would bring the family closer together. Before that, for years, I let it slide. I didn't visit often, but I still sent gifts for birthdays and holidays. I tried to stay connected even though every conversation with Mom felt like a subtle reminder of how I wasn't as important as Lisa. The call came on a Sunday morning while I was enjoying my coffee at the lake house. I knew something was up the moment I saw Mom's name on the screen. She never called unless she needed something. She started with small talk asking how I was and what I'd been up to. But it didn't take long for her to get to the point. Lisa and Danny were getting married and they needed a place to live. I asked why she was telling me this and that's when she dropped the bombshell. She wanted me to give them my lake house as a wedding gift. She said they needed a kickstart and that my house would be perfect for them to raise the baby. She went on about how they couldn't afford to rent a decent place and how Danny was really trying to find a job. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her flat out that the house wasn't up for grabs. I told her I'd worked hard to buy it and it meant a lot to me. She didn't care. She said I was being selfish and that family was supposed to help each other. She reminded me that Lisa had a baby to think about and that I didn't have any kids, so I didn't need the house as much as they did. I asked her where all this concern for the family had been when I was 16 and homeless. Her response, that was different because I brought it on myself. The conversation escalated quickly. She accused me of holding a grudge and said I was punishing Lisa for something that wasn't her fault. I told her that Lisa's choices were her own responsibility. I wasn't going to sacrifice my hard-earned stability for her mistakes. By the end of the call, Mom was yelling, saying she couldn't believe how heartless I'd become. She hung up on me, but not before telling me that she expected me to reconsider. I told her I wouldn't. Over the next few days, I started getting messages from Lisa. She said she couldn't believe I was so cruel and that I was basically dooming her child to a life of poverty. Danny chimed in too, sending a long-winded text about how he'd always admired me and hoped I see the bigger picture. I told them that I couldn't believe how cruel they were to bring a child into the world in their condition, much less think of having one. It was almost laughable the way they tried to guilt me into giving up my home. But I wasn't laughing. I was furious. The final straw came when Mom sent me a long message laying out all the reasons why I owed this to Lisa. She talked about how I was the successful one, how I had more than enough and how Lisa just needed a little help to get back on her feet. I didn't respond. I knew that anything I said would just add fuel to the fire, but I also knew this wasn't the end of it. Mom and Lisa weren't the types to take no for an answer. Update 1. I thought the calls and messages were bad, but they were nothing compared to what happened next. Their next move took things to a whole new level. I had just finished a long day at work. I was looking forward to heading out to the lake house for the weekend to relax and clear my head after the drama with Mom and Lisa. When my phone buzzed, I nearly ignored it, but something told me to check. It was a notification from my home security app, letting me know there had been movement on the property. I opened the live feed and felt my stomach drop. Lisa and Danny were on my porch, fiddling with the door. I could see Danny holding a crowbar, trying to prise open the lock while Lisa stood behind him, nervously looking around. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My hands were shaking as I called the local police department. I explained the situation and asked them to send someone over immediately. The dispatcher assured me the officers were on their way, but those few minutes felt like hours. As I watched them on the camera, I could hear their voices faintly through the feed. Lisa was urging Danny to hurry up, saying they couldn't get caught. Danny snapped at her, saying it was her fault that they had to do this because she couldn't convince me to hand over the house. When the police arrived, Lisa and Danny panicked. They tried to run, but it was too late. The officers stopped them and questioned them right there on the porch. I could hear Lisa sobbing, telling the officers that it was all a misunderstanding and that she thought she had permission to be there. I gave the officers access to the security footage, which clearly showed Danny trying to break in. They ended up arresting him for attempted burglary, and Lisa was arrested as an accessory. The whole thing left me shaken. I couldn't wrap my head around how far they were willing to go. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the blatant disrespect for me and everything I'd worked for. The next day, Mom called me in a rage. She said I had completely overreacted by involving the police and that I should have just laughed it off because, in her words, they were kids. I told her that kids shouldn't be having kids and breaking into people's houses. I reminded her that Lisa was a grown woman, a to-be mother, and someone who was about to get married. I asked her how long she was going to keep making excuses for her. Mom didn't like that and she accused me of being heartless again and said that if I really cared about family, I wouldn't have escalated things. I told her that Lisa and Danny were the ones who escalated it by trying to break into my house. I told her that since she likes using the family card so much, then she should reconsider calling me family because she cut me out a long time ago. The conversation ended with Mom hanging up on me again. I was used to it by now. Update 2. The fallout from the break-in was worse than I expected. Lisa stopped calling and texting, which I was honestly grateful for, but Mom ramped up her efforts. She started calling every day, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful pleas to angry tirades. At one point, she even showed up at my apartment unannounced. When I opened the door, she launched straight into a speech about how I was tearing the family apart. She said that Lisa was devastated, that Danny was humiliated and that I was the only one who could fix things. She begged me to drop the charges against Danny and Lisa and let them have the house. I told her I wasn't dropping anything and that the house was off limits. I said I was done being the scapegoat for their poor decisions. That's when she played her trump card. She said that if I didn't do this for Lisa, I would regret it for the rest of my life. She said that family was all we had, and once it was gone forever. Her words hit me harder than I expected, and for a brief moment, I wondered if I was being too harsh. But then I thought about everything I'd been through, being kicked out at 16, struggling to build a life from nothing, and never once being offered a helping hand. I asked her if she ever regretted kicking me out at 16, because it certainly didn't look like it. She started stammering. I told Mom that family went both ways and that I wasn't going to sacrifice myself for people who had never been there for me. She looked at me like I'd slapped her. Without another word, she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. After she left, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I knew I'd done the right thing, but it still hurt to stand up to her like that. Later that night, I got a text from Lisa. It was short and to the point. "You've ruined my life." I didn't respond. I knew there was no point, but then I got tempted and I texted back, "You're ruining the child's life. Give it up for adoption." Even I knew how to play the blame game. For the next few days, I focused on myself. I spent more time at the lake house trying to find peace in the quiet and solitude, but the nagging feeling that this wasn't over kept creeping in. Update 3. Sure enough, Mom and Lisa had one more trick up their sleeves and it was something I never saw coming. I thought the break-in fiasco and Mom's dramatic visit had been the climax of this mess, but I was wrong. Just when I thought I had some breathing room, Lisa and Danny managed to drag things to a new low. It started with a series of social media posts. Lisa took to her accounts to paint me as the villain in this whole situation. She wrote about how I was hoarding a vacation home while she, a struggling mother-to-be, was on the verge of homelessness. She conveniently left out the part about the break-in attempt, their arrest, and how Mom had bailed them out. The posts were dripping with melodrama. She shared pictures of her looking teary-eyed, standing outside a small apartment and captions begging for sympathy. She said she couldn't believe her own sister would turn her back on her during such a critical time. The comments were mixed. Some people, mostly mutual acquaintances, called her out for airing dirty laundry online. But others, her friends, Danny's friends, and even distant family members rushed to her defense. They said things like, families should help each other no matter what, and that I should be ashamed of myself. Mom wasn't subtle about where she stood. She chimed in on Lisa's posts, agreeing with her and saying she couldn't believe how cold-hearted I'd become. At first I ignored it. I figured people who knew the truth wouldn't buy into Lisa's sob story and those who didn't weren't my problem. But then Lisa crossed the line. She posted a picture of my lake house with a caption that said something like, "This is the house my selfish sister is keeping all to herself, while I struggle to keep a roof over my head." The photo was clearly taken right before they got arrested. It was grainy, but the house was unmistakable. I realized, with a sickening jolt, that Lisa must have taken it during the break-in attempt. The comments exploded. People started speculating about where the house was and how much it was worth. A few even joked about showing up there themselves to claim it for Lisa. That was when I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I contacted a lawyer to see what my options were. He advised me to file for a restraining order against Lisa and Danny, citing the break-in and the social media harassment. He also suggested sending a cease and desist letter to get Lisa to take down the posts. The restraining order was granted quickly, given the evidence I had, but the damage was already done. I felt like my privacy had been violated in the worst way, and it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about protecting myself from people who clearly had no boundaries. After the restraining order was issued, Lisa finally stopped posting about me online, but that didn't mean the drama was over. Instead, Mom decided to take matters into her own hands. She showed up at my lake house unannounced one Saturday morning. I was outside tending to the garden when I heard her car pull up. I hadn't invited her and I certainly didn't want to deal with her, but I knew ignoring her would only make things worse. Mom wasted no time getting to the point. She said she was there to talk some sense into me because, in her words, I had destroyed my relationship with Lisa and ruined the family's reputation. She launched into a long-winded speech about how the family was supposed to stick together, how Lisa was struggling and how I had turned my back on her when she needed me most. She said I was being selfish, hoarding my success while Lisa was drowning. I let her talk for a while, mostly because I needed time to collect my thoughts. When she finally paused to catch her breath, I told her I wasn't going to apologize for protecting what was mine. I reminded her that Lisa had tried to break into my house, that Danny and her had been arrested, and that Lisa had publicly humiliated me online, and she had supported them. I asked her how any of that was supposed to make me feel inclined to help them. Mom waved it off like it was no big deal. She said Lisa was just desperate and didn't know what else to do. She said I should understand because after all, I was once young and reckless too. That was the last straw. I told Mom that there was a big difference between being young and making mistakes and being an adult who refuses to take accountability for their actions. I reminded her that when I was Lisa's age, I didn't get handouts or sympathy. I got kicked out of the house for having a boyfriend. Mom tried to interrupt, but I didn't let her. I told her that for years I had worked hard to build a life for myself with no help from anyone, and I wasn't going to let Lisa and Danny take that away from me just because they couldn't get their act together. The conversation quickly turned heated. Mom accused me of being bitter and holding grudges. She said I was punishing Lisa for something that happened years ago and that I needed to let it go for the sake of the family. I told her that wasn't the case at all. I said I was simply standing up for myself for the first time in my life and that if she and Lisa couldn't handle that, it was their problem, not mine. I told her that she should either kick Lisa out or give up her house to them since she was such a doting mother. Mom left in a huff, but as she drove away, I felt relief. In the days that followed, I didn't hear from Mom or Lisa, which was a welcome change. I focused on getting back to my normal routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet. Update 4. I sat at my desk, staring at the blank screen. A storm of emotions churned inside me. Anger, frustration, sadness, and above all, exhaustion. Mom and Lisa had twisted the narrative so thoroughly that mutual acquaintances had started reaching out, urging me to reconsider my decision. Some of their messages were downright vicious. It became clear that staying silent wasn't an option anymore. If they wanted to paint me as the villain, I had every right to tell the truth. With a deep breath, I began typing, laying everything out as clearly and honestly as I could. I started from the beginning, explaining how I had been kicked out of the house at 16 for the crime of having a boyfriend. I described the years I spent struggling to make ends meet, working late nights while finishing high school, and eventually building the career that allowed me to save up for the lake house. Then I turned my attention to Lisa. I revealed how she had gotten pregnant in college, dropped out, and moved back home with her boyfriend Danny, who had no job and no intention of finding one. I recounted how they had repeatedly asked for handouts, first from Mom and then from me, despite having done nothing to earn my trust or respect. Finally, I addressed the breaking point, their attempt to break into my vacation home. I described the shattered window, the sheer audacity of their actions, and how Mom had brushed it off as youthful recklessness. To make it absolutely clear, I added that the lake house was mine and mine alone, purchased with my hard-earned money after years of sacrifice. I wrote that I had no obligation, legal, moral, or otherwise, to hand it over to anyone, especially not to people who had treated me as little more than a safety net. I read the post over 3 times before hitting publish. It was blunt, but not cruel. It was factual, but not devoid of emotion. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I just wanted to set the record straight. Within minutes, the post began gaining traction. Comments started flooding in, and for the first time, I felt a sense of validation. Strangers were expressing their support, calling out the entitlement and manipulative behavior I had endured. Some people shared their own similar experiences with toxic family dynamics, while others offered advice or words of encouragement. A few asked why I hadn't gone no contact sooner, and honestly, I didn't have a good answer. Maybe I'd held out some hope that things would get better. Maybe I'd been afraid of the fallout. But now, as I watched the truth spread, I felt lighter. Of course, not everyone was supportive. A few family members suggested that I should have kept the matter private. I told them that if they didn't shut up, I would post the messages they sent to me next. Part of me felt a pang of guilt, but then I remembered how publicly Lisa and Mom had made their campaign against me. They had chosen to involve others and to weaponize half-truths and outright lies against me. I was simply defending myself. The fallout was swift. Lisa was the first to react. Flooding my phone with furious messages, she accused me of ruining her reputation and of jeopardizing her and Danny's future. I questioned, what future? Mom wasn't far behind. Her messages were less angry and more pleading. She begged me to take the post down, claiming it would humiliate the family and create a rift that couldn't be repaired. I told her just because I kept quiet, they had gone and done all this to me. I warned her that if they came at me again, I wouldn't hold back. Later that evening, I received a call from a mutual friend who had seen the post. She told me that Lisa and Danny were in a panic, with Danny threatening to sue me for defamation. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. Everything I'd written was true and I had the screenshots to prove it. But with what money would he sue me anyway? As I lay in bed that night, I felt a sense of peace. You all were right. I shouldn't be the easy target anymore. Update 5. It was late in the evening when my phone rang, the name Lisa flashing on the screen. For a moment I debated letting it go to voicemail. I picked up, ready for whatever barrage of accusations she'd throw my way. I had the recorder on. Instead, what greeted me was sobbing. Not her usual manipulative crocodile tears, but deep guttural crying that made me pause. Before I could even ask, Lisa started talking, or rather wailing. Danny had broken up with her. He had packed his fangs and left, blaming her for everything. The backlash from my post, their lack of stability, and the growing pressure of their upcoming wedding. She said he told her she was toxic and that he couldn't handle her anymore. Her words were punctuated by hiccups and gasps as she kept repeating the same thing. She didn't know what to do, she said. She was scared and alone and didn't think she could handle raising a child on her own. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt bad for her. But then the anger resurfaced, bubbling up with a ferocity that surprised even me. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, but the words came out sharp and cold. I told her that she had no one to blame but herself. She had chosen to bring a baby into the world without any plan, without thinking about the consequences, and with a man who was clearly incapable of being a supportive partner. I asked her what she had been thinking, whether she genuinely believed that Danny, who couldn't hold down a job or take responsibility for himself, was going to magically transform into a reliable husband and father. She tried to interrupt, but I wasn't finished. I reminded her that she had spent weeks attacking me, trying to guilt me into handing over something I had worked tirelessly for. I asked her if she had been in her right mind when she decided to break into my house when she stood there with Danny and thought it was acceptable to try to take what wasn't hers. By this point, her sobbing had quieted, replaced by an almost stunned silence. But I wasn't done. I told her that life wasn't a fairy tale where everyone else fixes your mistakes. I asked her how she planned to take care of a child when she couldn't even take care of herself. Did she think Mom was going to swoop in and solve all her problems? Or was she still holding on to the delusion that I'd come to her rescue despite everything she'd put me through? She finally found her voice weak and trembling, accusing me of being stone cold. She said I didn't understand how hard her life was and how much pressure she was under. I couldn't help but laugh. I told her that I knew exactly how hard life could be because I had lived it. I shoved it in her face, how I'd been kicked out at 16, left to fend for myself with no safety net, no one to call for help. I told her that the difference between us was that I had taken responsibility for my life and made something of it, while she had spent hers blaming everyone else for her mistakes. The line went quiet again, but this time I didn't wait for a response. I had said everything I needed to say. With a final cutting remark about how it was time for her to grow up, I hung up the phone and let out a long, shaky breath. I felt no guilt, no lingering doubt. Lisa had made her choices and now she was facing the consequences. It wasn't my job to fix her life and I wasn't going to apologize. Update 6. I was just getting ready to unwind for the evening when the doorbell rang. Glancing at the clock, I frowned. It was late and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I looked through the peephole, my stomach sank. It was Ma'am. With a sigh, I opened the door, but I didn't step aside to let her in. She stood there looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen her, her eyes darting around like she was rehearsing what to say. I crossed my arms and waited, but before she could get a single word out, I stopped her. "If you're here to lecture me about Lisa or beg me to fix her mess," I said, "save your breath." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, clearly caught off guard, but I didn't let her recover. I laid into her with everything I'd been holding back for years. I told her that she had been the worst mother I could have ever imagined. I asked her how she could kick me out at 16 for something as trivial as having a boyfriend, throwing me to the wolves without a second thought. I asked her how she could sleep at night knowing she had let me fend for myself as a teenager, while Lisa was given chance after chance to mess up without consequence. Her hands trembled and she tried to stammer out an excuse about being under stress back then, but I cut her off. I told her that being stressed didn't give her the right to abandon one child while coddling another to the point of enabling her bad behavior. I pointed out how she had spent years bending over backwards for Lisa, always cleaning up her messes, and now she had the nerve to show up at my door expecting me to do the same. I saw her flinch as my voice grew louder. I told her that I wasn't going to be the family's punching bag anymore, and if she thought she could guilt me into it, she was delusional. She finally found her voice, weak and shaky, trying to say that I was being unfair, that she had made mistakes but was only trying to keep the family together. I laughed bitterly and told her that if she wanted to keep the family together, she should have started by treating her children equally, instead of turning me into the villain while painting Lisa as the helpless victim. Her face crumpled, but I didn't feel any sympathy. I told her that this was her mess to deal with, not mine, and that if she ever tried to show up at my door again with this nonsense, I would report her for harassment. She tried to protest, saying she was just trying to help Lisa, but I wasn't having it. I told her that it was her problem, that she had been helping only one child forever. I wasn't about to let her or Lisa tear it down. She was standing there, stunned into silence, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I didn't give her a chance to recover. With one final glare, I slammed the door in her face. I knew she'd probably paint me as the villain to anyone who would listen, but I decided to go no contact with all of them.